Hi, it's Mary Allen with Insight as a Service, and I'm here at the Meeting of the Minds conference in Toronto, speaking with David Miller, who's the President and CEO of the WWF Canada, former Mayor of Toronto, and now also Chair of the Council of Canadian Academies expert panel on the potential of ICT to green Canada's economy. David, that's a lot on your plate. Could you talk to me a little bit about the new expert panel, what its membership is, its mandate, and what your role is in the organization?
Well, the Council of Canadian Academies is an independent science-based organization that is tasked, usually by the federal government, sometimes by other governments, with finding independent science-based answers to important questions that face our country. And the question we've been tasked with is, how do we green the Canadian economy through ICT? What are the best uses? We have an expert panel with a range of expertise. We have Gordon Feller from Cisco, for example. We have a number of Canadian academics. We have representation from Europe in a whole range of areas, sensors, logistics, broadband, interconnectivity. And what we're trying to determine is, how do we green the Canadian economy? And from my perspective, my personal perspective, greening is a triple bottom line. How do we ensure that the economy is strong, the environment is strong, and our country is socially just and equitable?
Mm-hmm. If you're thinking about the investments that you need to make in ICT to support the development of a sustainable city, which can be triple bottom line, where would you start? And is there some kind of roadmap for implementation?
Well, I think with respect to sustainable cities, it's pretty clear where you start. And if we go back one little step, we have different environmental challenges. One of them is climate change. There are others. There are local environmental issues. There are issues with wildlife, nature, lots of challenges. But with respect to climate change, it's very clear that most emissions come from cities. And they come from three areas: buildings, transportation, and how we generate and use electricity. So from that perspective, the priorities are simple. You want to build a city that is livable, walkable, and has high quality green buildings, and also generates its electricity in a sustainable way. And you can start with any one of those three. I think the key is public transport. You need a public transportation network around the city that allows people to choose not to use a car. And once you have that, everything else can follow, because the development will occur around the network, people will choose to live on the network, and so on.
Mm-hmm. This takes a big commitment from city administration. ICT acquisition in government environments is complex, sometimes disjointed, and it can be a bureaucratic process. How can this be streamlined so that when technology is finally adopted, it's still on the leading edge?
It is a very large challenge for cities through their procurement processes, which are designed to avoid corruption and get the lowest price, to innovate with respect to IT. And I think part of the answer to that challenge is to open data. To use the innovation we have in a city like Toronto or a city like New York or San Francisco, tremendous culture of innovation if people can access the data. And it's a change in thinking, but I think a very important one. And that allows cities to harness innovation essentially for free. With respect to the IT acquisition itself, people need to be smart, need to be on the cutting edge, and need to prioritize. So, for example, is it more important to access the cloud, or to buy new ways for subway cars to run closer together so you dramatically increase the capacity of your transit system? And I think by prioritizing what is most strategic and by opening your data to the public, you can get very powerful results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole notion of harnessing innovation is a really interesting opportunity, and a lot of cities have tried to do this through the offer free Wi-Fi services. There are a couple of American cities that started this 20 years ago. There are a couple of Canadian cities that are using Wi-Fi in their transport systems, but so far we haven't seen that in Toronto.
Yeah, I think free Wi-Fi has an important place, and since I'm no longer the mayor, I can't really comment on why it's not being done now. Although, there's a lot of free Wi-Fi available now through coffee shops and things, so it's not the same situation it was 10 years ago. But it does speak to an important point because connectivity matters. And what happens, the market will ensure that people like stock exchange and the banks are all connected to broadband at the highest possible speeds. But the market doesn't ensure that low-income neighborhoods or rural economies and rural towns are connected. And that's a huge issue, I think, for Canada. We've always had a strength in communications, a leading world strength, partly because of our geography. But if we look at countries like Australia, they have huge national broadband strategies. And I think that's a place that perhaps we could look for a good positive example.
Right. Just one last question. Except for at events like Meeting of the Minds, it seems like the environmental issues are not really on the public or the even private radar these days in a way that they used to be. That's despite the scientific evidence that points to our need to do something right now. What can be done to raise awareness and to put environmental issues back on the public and the political agendas?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the environment, since the global recession in 2008, has become the number 2 or 3 priority of people and jobs, number 1. And it's understandable. But it's very clear in Canada, and I'm sure in the United States, people still value their wilderness, they value their natural spaces. There's an intrinsic value to the environment. And I think it's up to environmental leaders, first of all, to speak about the intrinsic value. It matters in Canada that we have, for example, the Great Bear rainforest with the spirit bear. It just matters of itself. We also have to make a better case of why we can build sustainable economies with positive environmental steps. Again, on the Great Bear example, where they want to put a bitumen pipeline through, there is a significant local economy based on fishing, and if there's one spill, that dies. So it's not the case of the environment or the economy. It's an economy and an environment in both cases. And so I think those cases need to be made. I also think Canadians need to see solutions and want to see solutions. And I think in some ways that's the most important thing. And one of the things I try to speak about when I speak is the real solutions that happen in cities. And so on global warming, for example, climate change, the City of Toronto, through its own policies and because certain coal-fired plants were closed, is 15% below the greenhouse gas emissions in 1990. That's the urban area, not the city government, the urban area. The city government's done even better. And so if Toronto can do it, and that way exceeds the relevant Kyoto target, if Toronto can do it, any city can do it. And people want to see the path. So I think if we speak to the value of wilderness in itself, that speaks to a deep-seated need for people. If we demonstrate that you can still have a sustainable economy and preserve our wilderness, conserve our wilderness areas, and if we can show a real path, because there is one, I think you change the nature of the debate. Yes, it's the second or third thing on people's minds right now, but it's still on their minds. And I think that kind of approach speaks to people's hearts and heads, and that's what you need to do.
Thanks very much for your insight today, David. I appreciate it.
Thanks for speaking with me.